A glittering birthday party inside a millionaire's mansion looks perfect on the surface, until a pregnant wife suddenly vanishes, and no one upstairs dares to ask why. What the guests cannot see is the most brutal truth hidden below the music and laughter. She has been locked in a freezing basement by the man who controls everything. He believes money can erase witnesses and power can silence pain, but he never expects a single quiet act to expose it all when a maid opens a door that was never meant to be touched. What follows is a collision of cruelty, courage, and consequences that shatters an untouchable image in seconds. Stay with us, because once justice enters this house, the story takes a turn no one at that party could have imagined. Tell us what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The Whitmore estate glowed that night as if it were made of light itself. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm gold across marble floors. Music drifted through the open halls, steady and elegant, rising and falling with the rhythm of conversation and laughter. Luxury cars lined the long drive, their polished surfaces reflecting the floodlights trained on the entrance. It was Victor Whitmore's birthday, and everything about the evening had been designed to remind the world who he was and what he owned. Guests moved easily through the grand hall, men in tailored black suits and women in shimmering evening gowns. Glasses of champagne were lifted again and again. Toasts were made to success, to influence, to a man who had turned wealth into power. At the center of it all stood Victor himself, tall and composed, dressed in a flawless black suit and white shirt, no tie at his collar. A metal watch caught the light on his wrist each time he raised his glass. His smile was practiced and confident, the kind that suggested nothing in his life was ever out of place. Yet one absence hung quietly over the room. Isabella Whitmore, his wife, was nowhere to be seen. More than one guest noticed. Whispers passed between small groups, careful and curious. A few women glanced toward the staircase, expecting to see a pregnant figure descend, perhaps late, but radiant. Isabella was 7 months along, and many had assumed she would be the focus of the evening, standing proudly beside her husband. Instead, her place at his side was occupied by Evelyn Moore. Evelyn wore a red wine-colored evening gown that clung perfectly to her figure. Her blonde hair fell in smooth waves over her shoulders, her makeup bold and precise. She stood close to Victor, close enough that her hand brushed his arm when she laughed. To an untrained eye, she looked like a hostess. To those who knew the rumors, she looked like something else entirely. A business partner leaned toward Victor with a polite smile. He gestured lightly with his glass and asked, almost casually, where Isabella was. Victor did not hesitate. He answered with a calm tone, saying his wife had not been feeling well and was resting upstairs. The doctor had advised her to avoid noise and crowds. He said it with ease, as if he had rehearsed the line. The partner nodded, satisfied, and turned back to his drink. Victor's eyes, however, hardened for just a moment after the question passed. The smile returned quickly, but something tight flickered beneath it. Evelyn noticed. She tilted her head slightly and gave him a knowing look, the corner of her mouth lifting in a small, confident smile. She did not ask where Isabella was. She already knew enough to feel secure. The band shifted into a softer melody. Servers moved between guests with trays of food, the scent of rich dishes filling the air. Laughter rose again, louder now, as if the party itself were determined to drown out any trace of unease. Victor raised his glass for another toast. He thanked his guests, his partners, his friends. He spoke of growth, of loyalty, of the future. Applause followed, warm and enthusiastic. Evelyn watched him with open admiration. When the applause faded, she leaned closer and whispered something into his ear that made him laugh. Her confidence was unmistakable. She stood beneath the chandeliers, as if she belonged there, as if the house itself recognized her presence. Across the room, a few guests exchanged glances. One woman murmured that she hoped Isabella was truly all right. Another replied that pregnancy was exhausting and that rest was sensible. The explanations settled like dust, easy enough to accept in a room filled with wealth and spectacle. Victor moved through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. Each step he took reinforced his control of the space. Nothing about his posture suggested concern. Nothing about his voice suggested tension. Yet, the further the night went on, the more noticeable the absence became. Not because it was spoken of, but because it was not. The staircase leading upward stood empty. No footsteps sounded from above. No message arrived excusing Isabella's absence. The silence surrounding her grew heavier with each passing minute. Evelyn drifted toward the center of the room, accepting compliments on the event as if they were meant for her. She laughed easily, her confidence feeding on the attention. When a guest asked if she had helped organize the party, she smiled and replied that Victor liked to keep things simple. Her answer carried an implication that only a few understood. At the edge of the hall, large double doors stood closed, their dark wood polished to a shine. Beyond them, corridors led deeper into the estate, into spaces unseen by the guests. Servants moved in and out quietly, careful not to interrupt the celebration. None of them spoke of Isabella. None of them were asked to. Victor paused near the base of the staircase for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the banister. He looked up, just briefly, toward the upper floors. His expression did not change, but his fingers tightened before he turned away again. The music swelled, filling the pause he left behind. As the night continued, the lights seemed brighter, the laughter sharper. The party pressed on with deliberate energy, determined to remain perfect. Yet beneath the polished surface, beneath the clinking glasses and practiced smiles, a sense of imbalance lingered. The camera of attention, if it could move beyond the glittering hall, would begin to drift away from the chandeliers and the guests. It would follow the curve of the staircase downward instead of up, past the laughter and the music, past the locked doors and the careful lies, toward a place where the light did not reach. Downward, beneath the celebration, toward the quiet depths of the house where the truth waited unseen. The basement was silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if the house itself had decided to forget the space existed. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of concrete and old storage boxes. A single yellow bulb hung from the ceiling, its light weak and uneven, casting long shadows along the walls. The floor beneath Isabella Whitmore was bare cement, cold enough to seep through the thin soles of her shoes and into her bones. She stood still for a moment, listening. From somewhere far above, music drifted downward through the structure of the house. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Laughter followed, then the soft clink of glasses. The sounds were distant, yet cruelly clear. There was a party happening directly over her head, a celebration filled with light and warmth, while she stood alone in the dark. Isabella moved toward the door she had been pushed through minutes earlier. The heavy metal surface looked different from this side. There was no handle, only a flat panel and a thick lock mounted on the outside. She pressed her palm against it, then knocked once, sharply. No response. Her heart began to beat faster. She knocked again, harder this time, calling Victor's name. Her voice echoed strangely in the enclosed space, bouncing off the walls and returning to her sounding smaller than it should have been. She waited, holding her breath, hoping to hear footsteps approaching from the other side. Nothing came. Isabella leaned closer to the door, her forehead resting against the cool metal. She tried the door again, pushing with more force, then pulling, even though she already knew it would not move. The lock held firm. Panic crept into her chest, slow and heavy. She stepped back and looked around the basement, searching for something familiar, something reassuring. There were shelves along one wall filled with boxes and bottles. Old furniture sat covered in sheets. A single chair stood in the corner, its wooden legs uneven. None of it offered comfort. Her hand went instinctively to her purse. It was gone. The realization struck her like a blow. Her phone was inside that purse, her keys, everything that connected her to the world outside this room. Isabella's breathing quickened as she searched her pockets, knowing even as she did it that there would be nothing there. Her fingers brushed against the fabric of her light sky blue maternity dress, now slightly wrinkled, the soft cotton cool against her skin. She pressed one hand to her stomach. The baby shifted faintly beneath her palm, a reminder of the life she was carrying. Isabella closed her eyes and took a slow breath, trying to calm herself. She whispered softly, not sure if she was speaking to herself or to the child inside her. She told herself she needed to stay steady. Panic would not help her. Panic would only make things worse. Another sound drifted down from above. Applause this time. Loud and enthusiastic. Isabella flinched. She imagined the scene upstairs without meaning to. Victor standing beneath bright lights. Guests smiling. Evelyn Moore beside him, confident and composed. The image burned in her mind, sharpening her fear into something colder and more focused. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. She had been placed here deliberately. Isabella walked back to the door and began knocking again, her fist striking the metal in a steady rhythm. She raised her voice, calling out for help, calling out for anyone who might hear her. Her voice cracked as she shouted, the sound scraping against her throat. Still, there was no response. The music above continued uninterrupted. Her arm began to ache, so she stopped and leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. The concrete was unforgiving. Cold seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, making her shiver. She drew her knees up slightly, careful of her belly, and wrapped her arms around herself. Time passed strangely in the basement. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. Isabella watched the light bulb flicker, listening to the hum of electricity and the distant pulse of music. Her thoughts spiraled despite her efforts to control them. How long would he leave her here? Did anyone know where she was? Would anyone come looking for her? A dull pain began to form low in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was only stress, her body reacting to fear. She shifted her position, trying to ease the discomfort. The pain did not fade. Instead, it pulsed, slow and deliberate. Isabella's breath caught. She placed both hands on her stomach, rubbing gently, whispering reassurance. She had felt discomfort before during the pregnancy, but this felt different, sharper, more urgent. Her fear deepened. She tried to stand, using the wall for support. Her legs trembled as she straightened. The room seemed to tilt slightly, forcing her to pause until the dizziness passed. She focused on breathing slowly, in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way her doctor had taught her. The sounds above grew louder for a moment, then softened again. The music changed. Another song began. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. She moved back to the door, pressing her ear against the cold surface. She could hear nothing from the other side, except the faint vibration of sound traveling through the structure. She knocked once more, weaker this time, her knuckles sore. "Please," she whispered, though she did not know who she was pleading with. Her strength faded quickly after that. Isabella returned to the floor, lowering herself carefully. She leaned her back against the wall, drawing her knees up again. Her dress had picked up faint smudges of dust and grime, the pale fabric no longer clean. She barely noticed. Her thoughts drifted to the baby again. She focused on the faint movements she could feel, counting them silently, grounding herself in the rhythm of another heartbeat. The pain in her abdomen came and went, enough to keep her alert, enough to keep fear close. Above her, the party continued. Laughter echoed faintly, glasses clinked. Victor's birthday carried on as planned, polished and perfect, while Isabella sat alone in the dark, her world reduced to concrete walls and a locked door. Eventually, exhaustion settled over her like a heavy blanket. Her head fell back against the wall, her eyes closed, though she fought sleep, afraid of what might happen if she lost consciousness. The basement remained unchanged, silent except for the distant celebration overhead. The night pressed on. Down below, in the forgotten space beneath the Whitmore estate, Isabella waited, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, listening to the sounds of a life she had been cut off from, unsure how long the darkness would last. The memory returned to Isabella in fragments, sharp and unwelcome, as she sat alone in the basement. It did not arrive gently. It forced itself forward, pulling her back to the moments that had led her here, to the choices that had sealed the door behind her. Only hours earlier, the house had felt very different. The afternoon light had streamed through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, bright and deceptive. Servants moved quickly through the halls, adjusting floral arrangements, carrying trays, preparing for the evening's celebration. The sound of preparation filled the air, footsteps, murmured instructions, the clink of glassware. It was Victor's birthday, and the house was being transformed into a stage. Isabella had been standing near the window of the sitting room, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a glass of water. She had felt uneasy all day, not physically, but emotionally. A quiet tension had followed her since morning, an instinct she could not explain. She had sensed something was wrong before she understood what it was. It was when she saw the dress bag that her breath caught. The bag had been placed carefully over the back of a chair near the entrance, the fabric inside visible through the clear cover. The color was unmistakable, deep red, elegant, not something Isabella owned, and not something meant for her. She had asked one of the staff whose dress it was. The answer had been hesitant. The maid had looked uncomfortable, her eyes flicking away before she muttered that it was for a guest. No name, no explanation. Isabella's unease sharpened. She waited until Victor returned from a phone call. He entered the room with his usual confidence, checking messages on his phone, already dressed in his black suit. Isabella stepped toward him, holding her composure carefully. She asked him who the guest was. Victor looked up slowly, irritation flashing across his face before he masked it. He told her it was none of her concern. The tone of his voice was enough to make her heart sink. She pressed him again. She reminded him of the guests, of the attention the evening would draw. She told him she deserved to know who would be standing beside him on his birthday. That was when he told her. He said Evelyn Moore would be attending. Not quietly, not discreetly, publicly. The words landed like a physical blow. Isabella felt her stomach tighten as if in response, her hand pressing instinctively against it. She stared at Victor, waiting for him to take the words back, to soften them, to explain it was a mistake. He did not. Isabella's voice shook as she spoke. She told him it was inappropriate. She told him people were already watching them closely. She reminded him that she was his wife, that she was pregnant, that this would humiliate her. Victor's patience snapped. He told her she was being dramatic. He told her she was weak. He said she was no longer useful in public settings, that her pregnancy made her fragile and embarrassing. Each word cut deeper than the last. Isabella tried to reason with him. She lowered her voice, afraid the staff might hear. She pleaded with him to reconsider, to think of their child, to think of appearances if nothing else. Tears filled her eyes despite her efforts to hold them back. Victor did not care. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He told her the evening was about him, not her. He said she would stay out of sight. He said Evelyn understood him in ways Isabella no longer did. The argument escalated quickly after that. Isabella raised her voice for the first time, anger breaking through fear. She accused him of cruelty. She accused him of betrayal. Her words echoed through the room, and for a moment, Victor looked startled, as if he had not expected resistance. Then his expression hardened. He told her she was ruining everything. He said she was hysterical. He said she needed to be put somewhere quiet until the party was over. Before Isabella could react, Victor grabbed her arm. His grip was not wild or uncontrolled. It was deliberate, calculated. He pulled her toward the hallway, leading away from the main rooms. Isabella stumbled, trying to keep her balance, her free hand protecting her stomach. She told him to let go. She told him she was pregnant. Her words meant nothing to him. The house felt suddenly empty as he dragged her away from the light. The sounds of preparation faded with each step they took downward. The air grew cooler, dimmer. They reached the basement door. Isabella realized what he intended too late. She tried to pull away, her heart racing. She begged him to stop. She promised she would stay out of sight. She promised she would not speak to anyone. She promised anything she thought might make him release her. Victor opened the door and shoved her inside. She stumbled forward, nearly falling, her hands catching herself just in time. Before she could turn around, the door slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed sharply in the confined space. Isabella rushed to the door, pounding on it, screaming his name. She heard the lock slide into place from the other side. Heavy, final. Victor's voice came through the metal, calm and cold. He told her to stay there until the party was finished. He said it was for her own good. He said she would thank him later. Then, his footsteps retreated. The memory ended there, dissolving back into the present moment, leaving Isabella sitting on the cold basement floor, her chest tight, her throat burning. The humiliation of it all settled over her again, heavier than fear. She had not been locked away by accident. She had been removed. Isabella pressed her palm against the concrete beside her, grounding herself. Her other hand rested on her stomach, feeling the steady presence of her child. The anger that had flared earlier dimmed, replaced by something darker and more painful: betrayal. Above her, Victor was celebrating. Evelyn was likely laughing beside him, wearing the red dress meant to announce her place. The house was full of light, and Isabella was hidden away, silenced. The realization hardened inside her. This was not just cruelty. It was a decision Victor had made without hesitation. He had chosen the party, the image, the other woman, over his wife and unborn child. The basement remained quiet, holding her and her memories within its walls. The truth of how she had come to be there was now unmistakable, and it offered no comfort. It only made the darkness feel more deliberate. Lily Carter moved quietly through the lower level of the Whitmore estate, pushing a small cleaning cart in front of her. The wheels made almost no sound against the polished stone floor, a habit she had learned early. On nights like this, silence was expected from the staff. The party upstairs was loud enough. The servants were meant to fade into the background. It was well past sunset. The birthday celebration was in full swing above her head. Music pulsed through the walls in a softened rhythm, distorted by layers of stone and wood. Occasionally, laughter broke through more clearly, followed by applause or the clinking of glasses. Lily kept her head down and focused on her task, wiping shelves and checking supplies near the storage rooms. She had been assigned to the wine storage area that evening, a space connected to the lower corridors of the house. It was cooler there, the air heavier. Lily wrapped her arms closer to herself as she worked, her gray uniform neat beneath a white apron. She was used to the temperature change. Still, something about the space felt different tonight. She paused. At first, she thought it was nothing, a trick of the house settling, or pipes shifting as they sometimes did when large events were underway. The Whitmore estate was old beneath its modern luxury. Sounds traveled strangely through its structure. Then she heard it again. A faint noise, barely audible over the distant music. Not mechanical, not sharp. It was soft, uneven, and unmistakably human. Lily straightened slowly, her hand tightening around the cloth she held. She listened carefully, holding her breath. The sound came again, a weak murmur, followed by what might have been a breath drawn too fast. Her heart began to beat faster. She turned off the small cleaning lamp she had been using and stood still, straining to identify the source. The noise seemed to come from deeper within the lower level, from the direction of the basement door. Lily frowned. The basement was rarely used during events. It held storage and old furniture, nothing that required attention that night. She took a few cautious steps forward. The sound came again, clearer now. It was not loud enough to be a shout. It was strained, as if someone were trying not to be heard. Lily felt a chill creep up her spine. She told herself it could be a guest who had wandered somewhere they should not be, or perhaps another staff member dealing with an issue. Yet, the sound did not match those explanations. It sounded like crying. Lily stopped a few feet from the heavy basement door. The metal surface was cool and dark, its handle untouched. The lock was engaged, as it usually was. She had passed this door countless times without thinking twice. Tonight, it felt different. The air around it felt tense, charged with something unspoken. She leaned closer. A whisper drifted through the door, so faint she almost missed it. The words were unclear, but the tone was filled with fear. Lily's breath caught in her throat. This was not a sound that belonged in a house celebrating a birthday. Her first instinct was to step back. This was not her place, she told herself. The Whitmores were powerful people. If something was happening behind that door, it was not something she should interfere with. She could get into trouble. She could lose her job. Still, she did not move. The whisper came again, followed by a soft knock from the other side. It was weak, uneven, like someone had little strength left. Lily's hands began to shake. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. She thought of Isabella Whitmore. Lily had not seen Mrs. Whitmore all evening. That alone was strange. Isabella was always kind to the staff. She made a point of greeting them, of asking their names. Lily remembered how Isabella had smiled at her just days earlier, resting a hand on her pregnant stomach, asking if Lily had been eating enough during her long shifts. The memory made Lily's chest tighten. She pressed her ear lightly against the door. This time, there was no doubt. A woman's voice came through, low and strained. It sounded exhausted, frightened. Lily could not make out the words, but she could hear the effort behind them. The sound of someone fighting to stay conscious. Lily stepped back, her heart pounding. Something was very wrong. She glanced down the corridor, half expecting someone to appear and stop her. No one did. The lower level remained empty and quiet, abandoned by the celebration above. The party music masked everything. No one upstairs would hear what was happening here. Lily swallowed hard. She knew she could not ignore this. She reached out and tested the door handle, already knowing it would not move. The lock held firm. The realization made her stomach drop. This was not an unlocked space someone had wandered into by mistake. Someone had been placed here. The whisper came again, weaker now. Lily felt a surge of fear, followed immediately by resolve. She could not walk away. Whatever the consequences, she could not leave someone trapped in that condition. Her hands trembled as she turned and hurried back toward the storage shelves. She knew where the spare keys were kept. Only a few staff members had access to them, and Lily was one of them. She had never used them without permission before. Tonight, permission felt irrelevant. She reached the small cabinet and opened it, her movements rushed but careful. The keys rattled softly as she searched for the right one. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out the distant music. Every second felt stretched thin. She found the key. For a moment, she hesitated, the metal cool against her palm. She imagined Victor Whitmore's reaction if he discovered what she was about to do. She imagined Evelyn Moore's sharp eyes. She imagined losing her job, being blamed, being silenced. Then she heard the sound again. It was barely there now. A breath, a faint plea. Lily closed the cabinet and turned back toward the basement door. Her steps quicker this time. Fear still gripped her, but it was no longer enough to stop her. Whatever was happening behind that door was more important than her position, more important than her safety. She stood before the door once more, key in hand, her heart hammering. She took a steadying breath and reached for the lock. Her hand shook as she guided the key toward it. Behind the metal barrier, the sounds faded again, leaving only silence and Lily's racing thoughts. She knew that once she turned the key, there would be no going back. Whatever she found on the other side would change everything. With one final glance down the empty corridor, Lily placed the key into the lock. She turned it slowly, bracing herself for what awaited beyond the door. The lock gave way with a soft click that sounded far too loud in the quiet corridor. Lily Carter froze, her hand still wrapped around the key, her breath caught in her throat. For a brief second, nothing happened. The basement door remained closed, heavy and unmoving, as if resisting the truth waiting behind it. Then Lily pushed. The door opened slowly, protesting with a low creak as it shifted inward. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying the smell of damp concrete and dust. The weak yellow light from the hanging bulb inside flickered, momentarily brightened by the spill of light from the corridor. Lily stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. At first, she saw only shadows. The basement was larger than it appeared from the doorway, cluttered with covered furniture and stacked boxes along the walls. The floor was bare cement, stained and uneven. The single bulb overhead cast long, distorted shapes that stretched across the room like reaching hands. Then she saw her. Isabella Whitmore was on the floor near the far wall. She was not standing. She was not even sitting upright. Her body was curled slightly on her side, her back pressed against the cold concrete, her knees drawn up as much as her condition allowed. One arm was wrapped protectively around her stomach. The other lay limp at her side. For a moment, Lily could not move. Isabella's light sky blue maternity dress was wrinkled and smudged with grime. The fabric clung to her in places, darkened where it had brushed the dirty floor. Her hair, usually neatly arranged, had fallen loose around her face, strands sticking to her damp skin. Her complexion was pale, almost gray in the dim light. Her eyes were half open, unfocused. "Oh my God," Lily whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. She rushed forward, dropping the key without noticing as it clattered against the floor. She knelt beside Isabella, careful not to touch her too suddenly. The closer she got, the more alarming the sight became. Isabella's chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath uneven. Her lips were dry, slightly parted, as if she had been calling out for a long time. "Mrs. Whitmore," Lily said softly. Her voice trembled. "Can you hear me?" Isabella's eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped her throat. Not quite a word, more a breath shaped by effort. Her fingers twitched weakly against the fabric of her dress. Lily's chest tightened painfully. "She's been here for hours," Lily thought, the realization crashing over her. Alone, in the cold, locked away, while the house above filled with music and laughter. Lily gently placed her hand on Isabella's shoulder. She was cold to the touch. Lily fought the urge to panic, forcing herself to focus. She had to think clearly. Isabella needed help, immediately. "It's Lily," she said, leaning closer so Isabella could hear her. "I'm here now. You're not alone." Isabella's eyes opened a little wider at the sound of Lily's voice. Confusion flickered there, followed by fear. Her gaze moved slowly around the basement, then back to Lily's face, as if she were trying to understand whether this was real. "The baby," Isabella whispered, the words barely audible. Her hand tightened slightly over her stomach. Lily nodded quickly, even though her own fear was growing. "I know," she said. "I'm going to get help, I promise." She glanced around the basement, searching for anything that might make Isabella more comfortable. There was nothing suitable. No blankets, no chair close enough. Lily slid her jacket off and carefully draped it over Isabella's shoulders, mindful of her movements. Isabella winced faintly as she shifted. "I'm sorry," Lily murmured, hating how helpless she felt. She checked Isabella's breathing again, then placed her fingers lightly against her wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there, fast, but steady enough to give her a shred of relief. Lily's mind raced. She knew what this meant. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. Someone had locked a pregnant woman in a basement and left her there. The weight of that truth settled heavily on Lily's shoulders. She felt a surge of anger, sharp and unexpected. Isabella tried to speak again, her lips moving without sound. Lily leaned closer, straining to hear. "He locked me in," Isabella whispered at last. Her voice cracked. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes but did not fall. She looked exhausted beyond words. Lily swallowed hard. She nodded again, her jaw tightening. "I know," she said quietly. "You're safe now. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. It's the dinners." She stood slowly, reluctant to move away from Isabella, but knowing she had to act. Every second mattered. The party upstairs felt impossibly distant now, unreal in its cruelty. Lily reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She forced herself to steady her grip, drawing in a deep breath. She glanced once more at Isabella, committing the image to memory. The pale face, the protective curve of her arm around her stomach, the quiet terror that lingered in her eyes. "I'm calling for help," Lily said, making sure Isabella heard her. "Just stay with me, okay?" Isabella nodded weakly. Lily stepped a short distance away, just far enough to make the call without blocking the light. She looked back at the open door, at the key lying uselessly on the floor, and then at the phone screen glowing in her hand. Her thumb hovered over the numbers. This call would change everything. She knew that the moment she made it, there would be no hiding what had happened. The truth would surface, and the carefully crafted image of the Whitmore household would begin to crack. Lily did not hesitate any longer. She unlocked her phone, her fingers moving quickly despite their tremble, and prepared to dial the emergency number, her eyes never leaving Isabella as she took the first decisive step toward exposing what had been done behind the locked basement door. Lily Carter held the phone to her ear with both hands, as if gripping it more tightly might make the words travel faster. Her knees were still on the cold basement floor, one eye fixed on Isabella Whitmore, the other on the dim doorway behind her. The basement felt smaller now, the air heavier, every second pressing down with urgency. The line connected. A calm voice answered on the other end, practiced and steady. Lily opened her mouth, but for a moment no sound came out. Her chest tightened, and she forced herself to breathe. "My name is Lily Carter," she said at last, her voice shaking despite her effort to control it. "I'm calling from the Whitmore estate. There is a pregnant woman locked in the basement. She needs help right now." The operator asked her to slow down. Lily swallowed and repeated herself, more clearly this time. She explained where she was. She explained that the woman had been trapped for hours. She explained that Isabella Whitmore was 7 months pregnant, weak, cold, and barely responsive when Lily found her. As she spoke, Lily watched Isabella closely. Isabella's eyes were half closed again, her breathing shallow. Lily moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her arm, hoping the contact might keep her grounded. The operator's questions came one after another. Was the woman conscious? Was she breathing? Was there any bleeding? Lily answered as best she could, her voice growing steadier as adrenaline replaced fear. She described Isabella's condition, the cold basement, the locked door. She did not soften the truth. "Yes," Lily said, when asked if the woman had been restrained. "She was locked in. The door was locked from the outside." There was a brief pause on the line, just long enough for Lily to sense the shift in tone. The operator told her that an ambulance and police officers were being dispatched immediately. Lily closed her eyes for a second, relief crashing into her so hard it made her dizzy. "Stay with her," the operator instructed. "Keep her warm if you can. Do not give her food or water. Help is on the way." "I'm with her," Lily said quickly. "I won't leave her." She ended the call and lowered the phone, her hand trembling now that she had stopped speaking. The silence that followed felt strange. The distant music from upstairs floated down the corridor, unchanged. The party was still happening. Lily leaned toward Isabella again. "They're coming," she said softly. "An ambulance. Police. Just stay with me." Isabella did not respond with words, but her fingers tightened weakly around the fabric of her dress. Lily took that as a sign she was still present, still fighting. She adjusted the jacket she had placed over Isabella's shoulders, tucking it closer around her arms. The basement was cold, and Lily could feel the chill creeping into her own bones. She rubbed Isabella's hands gently, trying to bring warmth back into them. Above them, laughter rose suddenly, followed by applause. Lily flinched. The contrast made her stomach turn. It felt obscene that celebration could continue so freely while someone suffered beneath it. She glanced toward the open basement door. The corridor beyond was empty. No one had noticed. No one had come down to investigate the open door or the sound of voices. The party upstairs was too loud, too consuming. Lily thought of Victor Whitmore, standing beneath chandeliers, raising his glass. She felt anger flare again, hot and sharp. This was not neglect. This was not ignorance. Someone had chosen to lock a pregnant woman in the basement of her own home. Isabella shifted slightly, a faint sound escaping her lips. Lily leaned closer, her ear near Isabella's mouth. "Cold," Isabella whispered, barely audible. "I know," Lily replied, her voice breaking despite herself. "I'm here. Just focus on breathing." She guided Isabella through slow breaths, counting quietly, trying to keep her awake. She watched the rise and fall of Isabella's chest, willing it to remain steady. Every time Isabella's eyes closed for too long, Lily called her name softly until she opened them again. Time stretched painfully. Lily checked her phone again, counting the minutes since she had made the call. It had not been long, but it felt endless. The sound of music above shifted as another song began, the beat pulsing faintly through the floor. Lily hated it. Each note felt like an insult. She listened carefully for any sign of approaching help. Nothing yet. Her mind raced through what might happen next. She knew the arrival of emergency services would draw attention. The party would stop. Questions would be asked. She wondered how Victor would react when the truth surfaced in front of his guests. The thought made her uneasy, but she pushed it aside. None of that mattered right now. Only Isabella mattered. Lily stayed close, speaking softly, telling Isabella that help was coming, that she was not alone anymore. She talked about small, harmless things, anything to keep Isabella engaged. She mentioned the sound of rain earlier that day, the smell of flowers in the house, the way the lights had looked in the hallway before the party began. Isabella listened weakly, her eyes following Lily's face. Tears slipped silently down her temples and into her hair, but she did not cry out. Her strength seemed spent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lily heard something new. At first, she thought it was part of the music, a distant hum, low and steady. She held her breath and listened again. The sound grew clearer, cutting through the walls, unmistakable now. Sirens. Lily's heart leapt. She looked toward the corridor, her breath catching. The sound was still far away, but it was real. Help was coming. "They're close," Lily said, her voice filled with relief. "Can you hear that?" Isabella's eyes fluttered open again. She nodded faintly. The sirens grew louder with each passing second, echoing faintly through the estate grounds. Lily imagined the scene outside, flashing lights approaching the long driveway, the night air filled with urgency instead of music. She stayed where she was, her body forming a barrier between Isabella and the rest of the basement. She did not want Isabella to feel alone again, not even for a moment. The sounds from upstairs began to change. The music faltered slightly, then resumed. Lily wondered if anyone had noticed yet. She wondered how long it would take before the celebration above was forced to stop. The sirens were unmistakable now, their wail cutting through the night, closer with every breath Lily took. She squeezed Isabella's hand gently. "You did the right thing," Lily whispered, though she was not sure whether she was saying it to Isabella or to herself. The basement remained dim and cold, but something had shifted. The silence was no longer complete. The world outside was moving toward them, fast and inevitable. Lily stayed by Isabella's side as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, knowing that the moment help arrived, nothing in the Whitmore house would ever be the same. The first interruption came as a flicker of confusion near the front of the estate. Guests closest to the tall windows noticed the change before anyone else. Blue and red light pulsed briefly across the glass, faint at first, then brighter. A few conversations faltered. Someone laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a coincidence, perhaps a passing vehicle on the road beyond the gates. Then the sirens became impossible to ignore. The music inside the grand hall wavered as heads turned toward the entrance. The steady rhythm that had carried the party began to feel out of place, too loud, too cheerful. Servers paused mid-step, trays balanced carefully as they waited for instructions. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Victor Whitmore stood near the center of the room, his glass still in hand. For a brief moment, his expression remained composed, the same controlled smile fixed on his face. He told himself there had to be a simple explanation, a neighbor, a misunderstanding, something that had nothing to do with him. But his eyes drifted toward the staircase without conscious thought. Evelyn Moore felt it too. She straightened slightly, her fingers tightening around her clutch. The red wine gown that had made her feel so powerful moments earlier now felt too conspicuous, too bright. She leaned toward Victor and murmured a question he did not answer. The front doors opened. Cold night air rushed into the hall, carrying with it the sharp, unmistakable presence of emergency responders. 2 paramedics entered first, followed closely by uniformed police officers. Their expressions were serious, focused, entirely out of place among the chandeliers and champagne. The music cut off. Silence fell across the room, heavy and sudden. A police officer spoke clearly, asking that guests remain calm and stay where they were. Murmurs erupted instantly. Phones appeared in hands. People craned their necks, trying to see what was happening, trying to understand why emergency services had arrived at a birthday celebration. Victor stepped forward instinctively, his authority flaring. He asked what the meaning of this was, his voice sharp with irritation. The officer looked at him without deference and asked his name. When Victor confirmed it, the officer's expression did not change. "We have received a report," the officer said, his voice carrying across the hall. "A pregnant woman was found locked in the basement of this property." The words landed like a shockwave. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Conversations exploded all at once. Some guests covered their mouths in disbelief. Others turned to look directly at Victor, their expressions shifting from curiosity to suspicion. Evelyn took a step back, her face drained of color as she processed what she had heard. She glanced toward the corridor, leading deeper into the house, then back at Victor. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across her features. Victor's mouth opened, then closed. He forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to his own ears. He said there must be some mistake. He said his wife was resting. He said the basement was locked as a precaution during events. The officer did not engage with his explanation. "Sir," he said evenly, "we need you to remain here." At that moment, the sound of a stretcher being wheeled across stone echoed faintly from the lower level. All eyes turned. Paramedics appeared at the far end of the hall, moving carefully but quickly. Between them was a stretcher. On it lay Isabella Whitmore. Her face was pale beneath the bright lights, her features drawn with exhaustion. A white blanket had been pulled over her, but her light sky-blue maternity dress was still visible beneath it, stained and wrinkled. One of her hands rested over her stomach, fingers curled protectively. Her hair was loose, clinging to her damp skin. A sharp cry rose from somewhere in the crowd. Several guests recoiled, horror etched across their faces. Whispers spread rapidly now, no longer restrained. People stared openly. Some stepped back as the stretcher passed, as if afraid of being too close to the truth. Victor froze. For the first time all night, his composure shattered completely. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor, the sound startling in the silence. He stared at Isabella as if seeing her for the first time, his face pale, his breathing shallow. "This is insane," he said, his voice unsteady. "She should not be here like this." A paramedic shot him a brief, cold glance and continued forward. Lily Carter walked beside the stretcher, her gray uniform rumpled now, her face tight with emotion. She kept one hand near Isabella's arm, watching her closely. When Lily looked up and saw the crowd, her eyes widened, but she did not stop. She held her head high, her expression resolute. The stretcher paused briefly near the center of the hall as paramedics adjusted their grip. Isabella's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, her gaze drifted over the unfamiliar faces, the lights, the room she should have been in all along. Then her eyes found Victor. Their gazes met. The room seemed to hold its breath. Isabella did not speak. She did not need to. The look in her eyes said enough. Hurt, fear, betrayal. Victor looked away first. The stretcher continued toward the exit. Outside, the ambulance doors stood open, lights flashing rhythmically. The night was alive with urgency now, the sirens echoing against the estate walls. Paramedics guided the stretcher out into the cold air, securing Isabella inside with practiced efficiency. Police officers remained inside, their presence anchoring the chaos. Victor tried to follow. An officer stepped directly into his path. "Sir," he said firmly, "you need to stay here." Victor protested. He said he needed to be with his wife. He said this was being blown out of proportion. His words tumbled over each other, lacking the authority they once carried. Evelyn hovered nearby, her face tight with fear. She avoided eye contact with anyone, her earlier confidence gone. When an officer glanced her way, she turned sharply and moved toward the edge of the crowd, trying to disappear. The guests were no longer pretending. Phones were raised openly now, recording, whispering, capturing the collapse of an image that had once seemed unbreakable. Some guests shook their heads in disgust. Others watched in stunned silence, the weight of what they had witnessed sinking in. The party was over. The celebration that had begun with laughter and luxury had dissolved into shock and disbelief. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, but the light felt harsh now, unforgiving. Victor stood at the center of it all, surrounded by uniformed officers and judging eyes. His birthday had ended not with applause, but with the echo of sirens and the sight of his wife being carried away on a stretcher. As the ambulance pulled away from the estate, its lights fading into the distance, the truth remained behind, undeniable and exposed. Nothing about the Whitmore household would ever be the same again. The Whitmore estate did not sleep after the ambulance left. The music was gone. The guests had been ushered out in uneasy clusters, and the long halls that once echoed with celebration now carried only the sounds of measured footsteps and quiet instructions. Uniformed officers moved through the house with calm precision, their presence reshaping the space into something procedural and exposed. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near the entrance, issuing directions to his team. His voice was steady, controlled, and carried authority without effort. He ordered the remaining staff to gather in one area and asked that no one leave without permission. The air felt colder now, stripped of illusion. In the basement, the door remained open. An officer stepped inside first, scanning the room carefully. The weak yellow bulb still hung from the ceiling, casting its uneven light over the same concrete floor where Isabella Whitmore had been found. The space felt stark and accusatory under scrutiny. What had once been hidden was now unmistakably visible. Photographs were taken from every angle. The position where Isabella had been lying was documented. The lock on the door was examined and tested. An officer noted that the handle was inaccessible from the inside. Another recorded the temperature of the room. Every detail was collected quietly and thoroughly. Lily Carter stood nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She answered questions in a low but clear voice. She described the sound she had heard, the door she had opened, the condition Isabella had been in. Her words were careful but firm. She did not exaggerate. She did not soften anything either. Upstairs, another team reviewed the security system. The Whitmore estate was equipped with cameras in nearly every hallway and exterior area. An officer guided a technician to the control room, where screens glowed faintly in the dim light. The footage was pulled up methodically. Timestamps were checked. Files were copied and secured. They watched Victor Whitmore escort Isabella down the corridor earlier that evening. They saw his hand gripping her arm. They saw her stumble slightly, her other hand instinctively protecting her stomach. They watched him open the basement door and push her inside. They watched him close the door and turn the lock. There was no audio, but none was needed. The room fell silent as the footage ended. Officer Brooks exhaled slowly and nodded once. He instructed the technician to preserve the files immediately. The evidence was clear. There would be no debate about what had happened behind closed doors. Victor Whitmore was seated in the main hall under supervision, his posture rigid. The black suit he had worn with confidence earlier now seemed to weigh on him. He stared at the marble floor, jaw clenched, as officers moved around him. He had tried to speak several times, to explain, to assert control. Each attempt had been met with calm redirection. When Officer Brooks approached him, Victor looked up sharply. "This has been blown out of proportion," Victor said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "My wife was emotional. She needed a quiet place to calm down." Officer Brooks did not react. "Sir," he said evenly, "the evidence does not support that statement." Victor's mouth tightened. He glanced around the room as if searching for support, but the faces around him offered none. Staff members avoided his gaze. Officers remained focused on their tasks. Evelyn Moore was found near the far end of the hall, standing alone. Her red wine gown, once striking, now drew uncomfortable attention. An officer approached her and asked for her name. She answered, her voice thin. "Not at this time," the officer replied. Evelyn's composure fractured further. She folded her arms tightly, eyes darting toward Victor, and then away again. Whatever confidence she had carried into the evening had drained entirely. Outside the estate gates, flashing lights attracted attention. Neighbors gathered at a distance. Word spread quickly. Before long, news vans began to arrive, their cameras trained on the illuminated driveway. Reporters spoke urgently into microphones, speculating about the situation unfolding behind the gates. Inside, officers continued their work. Statements were taken from staff members one by one. Each account reinforced the same picture. Isabella had not been seen all evening. Victor had insisted she was resting. The basement had been off limits. Lily's discovery had changed everything. Officer Brooks gathered his team briefly speaking in low tones. Decisions were made. Procedures were confirmed. He returned to Victor. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "based on the evidence collected and witness statements, you are being detained in connection with the unlawful confinement of your wife." Victor stiffened. "You cannot be serious," he said. "This is my house." "That is not relevant," Officer Brooks replied. He signaled to another officer. The movement was small, but it carried finality. Victor stood abruptly, agitation breaking through his restraint. He protested again, louder now, claiming misunderstanding, stress, anything he could reach for. The officers remained calm as they guided him forward. When the handcuffs closed around his wrists, the sound echoed faintly in the vast hall. A hush fell over the room. Victor looked around, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. Cameras from outside captured the moment through the windows, recording the image of a man whose control had vanished. Evelyn watched from a distance, frozen. An officer approached her next, informing her that she would need to answer questions as part of the investigation. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She nodded stiffly. As Victor was escorted toward the exit, the weight of the night settled heavily over the estate. The chandeliers still glowed, but the light felt unforgiving now, exposing every flaw, every lie that had been concealed beneath elegance. Outside, reporters surged forward, shouting questions as officers guided Victor into a waiting vehicle. He did not answer. His face was tight, eyes fixed ahead. The image of certainty he had cultivated shattered beyond repair. Back inside, Lily stood near the staircase, exhaustion finally catching up with her. An officer thanked her quietly for coming forward. She nodded, tears threatening but held back. She thought of Isabella, now in the care of doctors, and hoped she would be safe. The truth had emerged fully now, not through spectacle, but through evidence, testimony, and the undeniable weight of what had been done. As the estate settled into an uneasy stillness, one fact remained clear. The night that had begun as a celebration had ended as an exposure. The power Victor Whitmore believed he held had failed him when faced with reality, and the story, now in the open, could no longer be controlled. The days following Victor Whitmore's arrest unfolded with relentless momentum. What had begun as a single emergency call became a public reckoning, driven by evidence, witnesses, and a growing demand for accountability. The image of a powerful man escorted from his own estate in handcuffs did not fade. It multiplied, appearing across screens, headlines, and conversations far beyond the gates of the Whitmore property. Victor was taken into custody that same night and transferred to a secure holding facility. The black suit he had worn to celebrate his birthday was replaced by neutral clothing. The confidence that had once defined his posture was gone, replaced by rigid tension. He sat through questioning with clenched fists and rehearsed explanations, insisting that the situation had been misunderstood. He claimed concern for his wife's emotional state. He repeated that the basement had been meant as a quiet space. The investigators did not argue. They listened, took notes, and presented facts. Security footage was played back in full. The sequence was clear and uninterrupted. Victor guiding Isabella down the corridor, his grip on her arm, the basement door opening, Isabella stumbling forward, the door closing, the lock turning. Timestamps confirmed the duration she had been confined. There were no gaps large enough to cast doubt. Medical reports followed. Doctors documented Isabella Whitmore's condition upon arrival at the hospital. Hypothermia symptoms were noted. Dehydration was confirmed. Stress-related complications associated with late pregnancy were carefully recorded. Each line added weight to the case. The conclusion was unmistakable. Prolonged confinement in a cold, enclosed space had endangered both mother and child. Prosecutors moved quickly. Charges were filed for unlawful confinement and endangerment of a pregnant individual. Additional counts were considered as the investigation widened. Victor's legal team attempted to slow the process, requesting delays and private hearings. Those requests were denied. The evidence left little room for maneuvering. Evelyn Moore was questioned separately. She arrived for her interview visibly shaken, the bold confidence she had displayed at the party entirely gone. Investigators asked about her relationship with Victor. about her presence at the estate that night, about what she knew of Isabella's whereabouts. Evelyn claimed ignorance. She said she had believed Isabella was resting. She said she had not asked questions. Her statements were noted and compared against other accounts. While no immediate charges were filed against her, she was informed that the investigation remained ongoing. Her name appeared in reports and articles regardless, tied permanently to the scandal unfolding. Meanwhile, Victor's financial empire began to fracture. Court orders were issued to freeze key accounts, pending further proceedings. Assets connected to the Whitmore estate were placed under review. Board members of Victor's companies convened emergency meetings. Statements were released, distancing themselves from his actions. Stock values wavered. Investors reacted swiftly to the reputational damage. The illusion of untouchable power collapsed piece by piece. Lily Carter was placed under protective supervision. Law enforcement recognized the significance of her testimony. She was relocated temporarily and instructed on safety protocols. Investigators met with her multiple times, ensuring her account was fully documented. Lily spoke clearly and consistently. She described the sounds she had heard, the locked door, Isabella's condition, the decision to call for help. Her courage became a focal point in public discussion. Articles referred to her as the staff member who refused to look away. Messages of support flooded in through channels she did not know existed. Lily accepted none of the attention easily. She thought only of Isabella and hoped her actions had not come too late. Public reaction intensified. Advocacy groups issued statements condemning the abuse of power and the targeting of a pregnant woman. Legal experts weighed in on the severity of the charges. Social media filled with anger and disbelief. The story resonated deeply, not because of wealth, but because of vulnerability and betrayal. Victor Whitmore remained silent as the pressure mounted. In custody, he requested meetings with his attorneys, drafting responses that grew increasingly defensive. Each new revelation narrowed his options. The more the truth surfaced, the less convincing his explanations became. At the hospital, Isabella remained under close observation. Doctors monitored her vital signs continuously. Specialists assessed the condition of the baby, tracking movement and heart rate. Nurses kept the room quiet and dim, shielding her from the chaos unfolding outside. Isabella drifted in and out of consciousness, her body exhausted from the trauma it had endured. Officer Daniel Brooks visited the hospital briefly to speak with medical staff and confirm details. He did not attempt to see Isabella directly. He understood the importance of space. The case no longer depended on her immediate statement. The evidence spoke loudly enough. As evening settled, a nurse adjusted the blanket covering Isabella and checked the monitors once more. The steady rhythm of a heartbeat filled the room, reassuring and persistent. The baby was still fighting, so was the mother. Isabella stirred. At first, it was only a slight movement of her fingers against the sheet. Then her eyelids fluttered. She frowned faintly, as if trying to piece together where she was. The room was unfamiliar. The air smelled clean and sterile. Soft light filtered through partially closed blinds. She took a shallow breath. The nurse noticed immediately and moved closer, speaking softly. Isabella's eyes opened a little wider. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by recognition of the hospital setting. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The nurse reassured her, explaining that she was safe, that she was in the hospital, that help had arrived in time. Isabella did not speak. Her throat felt dry, her body heavy, but tears gathered silently at the corners of her eyes. They slid down into her hair as relief and grief collided within her. Outside the room, the world continued to react, to judge, to demand justice. Court dates were scheduled. Investigations pressed forward. Victor Whitmore's name became synonymous with disgrace rather than power. Inside the quiet hospital room, Isabella lay still, listening to the steady sounds around her, aware that something fundamental had shifted. The confinement was over. The truth was no longer hidden. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, the darkness she had been trapped in had finally been brought into the light. Morning light entered the hospital room quietly, filtered through pale curtains that softened its brightness. The night had passed without alarms, without urgent footsteps rushing down the corridor. For the first time since everything had unfolded, the world around Isabella Whitmore felt still. She lay on her side, her body exhausted but no longer trembling. A light blue patient gown covered her, clean and warm. One hand rested gently over her stomach, rising and falling with each slow breath. The steady rhythm beneath her palm was there, reassuring and persistent. Her child was alive. That knowledge anchored her more firmly than anything else. The door opened softly, and a nurse stepped inside. She checked the monitors with practiced care, her movements calm and efficient. When she looked back at Isabella, her expression held quiet reassurance. She told her that everything remained stable. She said the baby's heartbeat was strong. She reminded Isabella to rest. Isabella nodded faintly. After the nurse left, the room returned to silence. Isabella closed her eyes and allowed herself to breathe without fear. The memories were still there, heavy and painful, but they no longer pressed against her chest with the same suffocating force. The basement, the cold floor, the locked door. Those images would not disappear easily, but they no longer defined the present moment. Later that morning, Lily Carter arrived. She hesitated briefly at the doorway, her hands clasped together as if unsure whether she belonged there. Her gray uniform had been replaced by simple clothes, but her posture remained the same, careful, respectful. When Isabella opened her eyes and saw her, something inside her softened. Lily stepped closer, her eyes shining with emotion. She did not speak at first. She did not need to. Isabella reached out slowly, and Lily took her hand, holding it with both of hers. "Thank you," Isabella said quietly. Her voice was hoarse but steady. Lily shook her head, tears slipping free despite her effort to control them. She said she was sorry for what Isabella had endured. She said she wished she had found her sooner. Isabella squeezed her hand gently, silencing the apology. "You saved us," Isabella said. "That is what matters." They sat together for a while, speaking only when necessary. The bond between them did not need many words. It was built from a single decision, from courage, in a moment when it would have been easier to walk away. Outside the hospital room, the world continued to shift. Victor Whitmore remained in custody, his fate moving steadily through the legal system. Hearings were scheduled, evidence was reviewed. His influence no longer shielded him. The wealth that once commanded silence could not erase recorded footage or medical reports. The process was slow, deliberate, and unavoidable. Evelyn Moore withdrew from public view. Her name still surfaced in articles and discussions, tied permanently to the night everything collapsed. She issued no statements. There was nothing left to defend. The Whitmore estate itself stood quiet, stripped of celebration and illusion. Its gates remained closed, watched by curious eyes and waiting cameras. What had once symbolized power now carried a different meaning. For Isabella, none of that mattered as much as the present moment. Each day, she grew a little stronger. Doctors monitored her closely, adjusting treatment and encouraging gentle movement. She walked the corridor slowly with support, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet, reminding herself that she was no longer trapped. Each step was a small victory. She spent long hours simply resting, listening to the quiet hum of hospital life. The sounds were steady and predictable. They brought comfort rather than fear. At night, she slept without waking to panic, her body gradually learning that it was safe again. One afternoon, sunlight poured more brightly through the window than it had before. Isabella sat upright in bed, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked out at the city beyond the glass, watching people move through their lives, unaware of how close everything could come to breaking. She placed both hands over her stomach and closed her eyes. "I'm here," she whispered softly. "We're here." The words felt real when she spoke them. A sense of resolve settled over her. She did not know exactly what the future would look like. There would be legal proceedings. There would be difficult conversations. There would be moments when memories resurfaced unexpectedly. Healing was not immediate, and it was not simple. But she also knew something else now. She had survived, not because of wealth or status, but because someone had chosen to see her, to hear her, to act, because the truth had been brought into the open and refused to be buried again. As the day faded into evening, the room filled with warm light once more. A nurse came in to check on her. smiling gently. Lily sent a message, asking how she was feeling. Isabella replied with a simple answer. She said she was resting. She said she was hopeful. Outside, the city continued to move forward. Inside, Isabella allowed herself to do the same. The chapter of her life, defined by fear and confinement, had ended. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. And within her, steady and strong, was the quiet promise of a new beginning.